Welcome back to Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. Having reconvened for Thursday's session 9 hours after passage back to the House of a rescissions package with $9 billion in spending cuts, Senator Thune focused again on features of the reconciliation bill passed on July 3rd. The following material is protected by copyright.
The Democrat hysteria over Republicans' one big, beautiful bill is in full swing. And Democrats seem to have fixated on the bill's Medicaid provisions as a useful tool, they hope, to attack Republicans. And they've decided that a good talking point is to blame rural hospital closures, including current rural hospital closures, on our bill's Medicaid provisions. Well, there's only one little problem, Mr. President. The provisions of our bill, the Democrats would like you to believe threaten rural hospital, those provisions don't even go into effect until 2028, 2.5 years from now. Suggesting that those provisions are responsible for rural hospitals closing this month is the height of absurdity. Mr. President, I said there was one little problem with Democrats' argument. But in fact, there are a whole lot of problems with Democrats' argument, starting with the fact that rural hospital closures are a long-standing problem, not something that is suddenly being triggered by our bill. Under President Biden, Medicaid spending soared, and yet rural hospitals still closed. Why? Because rural hospitals have to deal with a lot of challenges that hospitals in major metropolitan areas don't have to deal with. Despite those challenges, many rural hospitals are finding ways to adjust, to keep their doors open and to serve their communities. And we have taken steps with our bill to ensure that they can continue to do so with a $50 billion fund for vulnerable providers like rural hospitals, a fund that goes into effect this year. Our goal with this fund is to give rural hospitals and other vulnerable providers the time and resources to find solutions to some of the challenges they're facing, and to give state governments the time to look at their budgets and develop ways of assisting rural hospitals that don't involve pushing state responsibilities onto federal taxpayers. Now, Mr. President, hopefully what I've said so far brings some much-needed clarity and accuracy to this discussion. But I want to step back for a minute and discuss the overall scope of what we're doing with the Medicaid provisions in our bill. We are restoring Medicaid to what it was originally intended to be, a federal-state partnership to support the most vulnerable Americans. Let me just repeat that, Mr. President. We are restoring Medicaid to what it was originally intended to be, a federal-state partnership to support the most vulnerable Americans. There's been drift on both of those in the past few years, Mr. President. We've drifted from a federal-state partnership to a situation where the federal government picks up more and more, sometimes close to all, of the tab. And we've drifted from a focus on the most vulnerable Americans. Medicaid was created to serve the most vulnerable populations, the elderly poor, the disabled, pregnant women, and children in need. But in 2010, President Obama and the Democrats allowed states to expand Medicaid to include able-bodied adults earning up to 138% of the federal poverty level. And they gave states an incentive to do so by promising that the federal government would pick up almost all of the tab. Now, combine that with the Biden administration's Medicaid rules and waivers, and both the Medicaid population and federal spending on Medicaid have exploded. Medicaid spending has grown by more than 50% since 2019. 50% since 2019. That's utterly unsustainable, Mr. President. And it threatens the stability of the program for the most vulnerable populations. And so Republicans implemented several common sense measures to slow the rate of Medicaid growth and to refocus the program on Americans most in need. Note what I said. Slow the rate of Medicaid growth, Mr. President. We are not cutting Medicaid. We are simply slowing the rate of growth. And as Senate Finance Committee Chairman Crapo noted, only in Washington is a smaller increase in spending considered a cut. So what did we do in our bill, Mr. President? We implemented measures to reverse non-citizens, or I should say we implemented measures to remove non-citizens from the Medicaid rolls. We implemented an extremely mild work requirement, just 20 hours per week for able-bodied, working-age adults without young children. We overturned Biden-era regulations that made it difficult to remove individuals who don't qualify for Medicaid. And we took aim at rampant abuse of the provider tax loophole. Now, use of this loophole, which sees states inflate Medicaid service prices in order to garner a larger reimbursement from the federal government, has been a problem for quite a while now. In fact, President Obama proposed multiple budgets featuring measures to rein in abuse of the provider tax. But states continued to take advantage of the gimmick, and thanks to waivers that the Biden administration issued to California and other blue states last year, allowing them to further exploit a similar loophole, taxpayers were on the hook for tens of billions of dollars in new spending. And so we took action to rein things in. We're not eliminating states' ability to use the provider tax loophole, but we are instituting limits, the identical limits, in fact, that President Obama proposed imposing. And we're making states take responsibility for their Medicaid decisions. States like California, which chooses to spend state funds to have its Medicaid program cover illegal immigrants. They should not be able to, in effect, have the federal government bail them out for their reckless spending decisions. Resources are not unlimited, Mr. President, and states need to shoulder their share of the federal-state Medicaid partnership rather than pushing off their costs onto federal taxpayers. Now, Mr. President, the net effect of all these measures, like removing ineligible individuals and individuals who refuse to work from the Medicaid rolls and restraining state abuse of the provider tax loophole, will be able to put Medicaid on a more sustainable fiscal footing going forward and put a renewed emphasis on the vulnerable individuals this program was actually created to serve. Vulnerable individuals will also be helped by the major investment our bill makes in expanding home and community-based services for individuals with developmental disabilities. This will reduce multi-year waiting lists for services and allow individuals with disabilities to access the care that they need at home or in their communities. Mr. President, the One Big Beautiful Bill was developed to make hard-working Americans safer, stronger, and more secure. And the Medicaid provisions of the bill fit right in with that mandate. By refocusing available Medicaid dollars on those this program was originally intended to serve, we will make vulnerable Americans more secure and ensure that this program will continue to be available to Americans in need long into the future. That sounds like a good day's work, Mr. President.
Schumer focused remarks on projected impacts of the rescissions package.
Mr. President, last night, while Americans were asleep, Senate Republicans gutted critical funding for local TV and radio, for foreign aid that keeps America safe, all to keep paying for their billionaire tax cuts. On the very same day that communities in Alaska turned to public radio and TV for tsunami warning updates, Republicans in Washington voted to take that funding away. It is senseless, it is cruel, and just defies common sense. The Republicans have become the party of cut now, ask questions later. Cut health care for 17 million Americans. Cut food assistance for hungry kids. Cut good-paying energy jobs. Let Beijing get ahead of us. Never mind the kids will go hungry, or that families will lose insurance, or that people will get sick and die. Make no mistake, make no mistake. Just like with the big ugly bill, the more Americans learn about what Republicans just did in this rescission package, the more they won't like it, and the more Republicans will squirm. We saw a lot of squirming last night. When parents see Republicans just axed educational programming, when people see Republicans just axe Sesame Street to pay for tax cuts to billionaires, when rural Americans see Republicans not just betrayed them and defunded public radio, sometimes the only source in rural areas so vital to natural disasters, and it's the only news source there, the consequences will be severe. Americans will remember. Democrats will ensure that they don't forget. We will make sure Americans don't forget what Republicans are doing, just like we are doing with the big ugly bill, just like these taxes for billionaires, just like these massive Medicaid cuts. Last night's vote axing PBS, axing local TV will haunt Republicans as the damage sets in. Today, tomorrow, next month, next year, Americans will be talking about these cuts at their diners, at the grocery store, at dinner, at the park, because the cuts will be felt everywhere. Because here's what Americans don't want. They don't want Republicans to rubber stamp DOJ's awful and damaging cuts. No questions asked. Republicans never seem to challenge Donald Trump or DOJ or vote. When you cut investments that actually make people's lives better, when you cut those investments like health care, local TV, education, people get angry. So make no mistake. When Donald Trump and Republicans rammed the big ugly bill through, Americans quickly saw how Donald Trump and Republicans betrayed them, and their popularity is already declining. When families saw the consequences, when Americans saw the Medicaid cuts, when kids are getting food ripped from their mouths so billionaires can pay less in taxes, it is disastrous for Donald Trump and many Republicans. And we saw that on many faces across the aisle last night who didn't want to do what Trump wanted them to do, but were forced into it because of threats or frailty or fear. Well, the same thing has happened as I speak. Democrats are fighting in the Appropriations Committee to unwind the awful DOJ cuts against veterans. And that's what's happening to our veterans. And that's just what's happening to our veterans through these DOJ cuts. What's happening to them is terrible. Our veterans, these are the people who volunteered, who risked their lives. Many of them came back with injuries and PTSD. And when they get to the veterans' hospitals, because there have been such cuts, their care is inadequate. They risk their lives for us, and Republicans and Trump and DOJ cut veterans' health and veterans' care. It's outrageous. Outrageous. And they're doing it. We've got a lot of verbiage. Oh, we love our veterans. And then they cut what our veterans need and want. The meeting today in the Appropriations Committee shows that there's a way Republicans can undo these awful DOJ cuts. Reversing DOJ cuts through the Milcon appropriations bill today is a direct rebuke to Donald Trump. It's saying to Trump, we don't like what you did, but we'll see if Republicans come along, if they will defy Trump and vote to undo the DOJ cuts. It's simple. Republicans have a choice to make as we move forward. They can put their constituents over Trump and work with Democrats to continue funding the government in a responsible way. Or they can continue to go it alone and continue to bow in obeisance to Donald Trump and rubber stamp his awful cuts that do such harm to our Americans in uniform. And if they go it alone, without undoing the terrible things that DOJ did, here and elsewhere, Democrats will make them pay a price, just as we have made them pay a price on reconciliation. Republicans can continue to bow in obeisance to Trump and rubber stamp whatever cuts he tells them to make. But you can't just push these awful cuts farther and farther down people's throats and not expect them, the people, to respond. Republicans, for their own good and for the good of the country, need to be careful about making so many devastating cuts so quickly and just on a party line vote in reconciliation and rescission and whatever else they might come up with to avoid the process. And if Republicans keep going down this road, if they choose to ignore the bipartisan process, if they keep reneging on funding agreements reached in committee, if they prefer to strike deals with Donald Trump and Russell Vought, to use impoundment, rescissions, and pocket rescissions to cut whatever they want on a party line vote, the harms to the American people will be devastating. It will be devastating in health care. It will be devastating to our farmers. It will be devastating to our veterans. It will be devastating to the millions of people who were promised jobs in health care and clean energy. It will be Americans back home who will see even more cuts as they proceed on this road, if they do. More cuts to housing, more cuts to education, to research, to economic development. It'll be our farmers who see their costs go up. It'll be our small businesses who get taken advantage by special interests and by erratic tariff policies. The consequences for this chamber and our country will be stark, very stark indeed. On judges. Today, Republicans will spend the day ramming through more of Donald Trump's extreme judicial nominees. When choosing his judges, only one thing matters to Donald Trump: unquestioned fealty to him. Brazen, unquestioned fealty. Doesn't matter what the law is. Doesn't matter about judicial independence or precedent or even the Constitution. The only thing that Trump cares about in a judge, we've seen this, we know it, our Republican colleagues who just march in lockstep to vote for these awful judges know it. The only thing Trump cares about is unyielding fealty to him, and he says it brazenly. We have never seen such a disturbing litmus test for judges in America. The judges before the Senate today are no different than the previous ones: radical, inexperienced, and chosen not for their fairness, but for their ideological fealty to Donald Trump and the hard right. The first nominee, Joshua Devine of Missouri, is a political operative with no judicial experience, who made a career attacking everything from voting rights to common sense gun safety to defending government overreach into people's private lives. It's said that Donald Trump wants to make sure that no one in this who gets nominated has ever shown any independence. He looks through their campaign finance. He looks through who they've worked for. No independence. Mr. Devine hasn't even been out of law school 10 years and spent less than half that time practicing as an attorney. The next nominee, Christian Stevens, is also of Missouri, similarly made a name for himself by undermining racial justice efforts in our judicial system and siding almost relentlessly with corporations in cases of worker discrimination. That's who Donald Trump puts in. If the average American has the ability to go to court and fight their boss or anything else, Donald Trump wants nominees who will always side with the big shots, with the well-connected. Nominees like Devine and Stevens should frighten anyone who cares about a strong, independent judiciary. They have failed to show the American people that they won't just be Donald Trump's foot soldiers in black robes. The Senate should reject their nominations.
Thanks for listening. Follow our YouTube channel at FedNet TV for House action on cryptocurrency bills, defense spending, and the rescissions bill. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without express written permission from FedNet is prohibited.